Welcome to another show of the Abwazi Wine Buzz. And today's guest, not only a som, a writer, editor, but also an author, and is now a director of education. Now, if you couple that and you add in the fact that she has a formal training in maths and science and fine arts, many of us would be happy with just one of those accolades. But today's guest has all of those. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show, Kelli
Thank you
White.
for having me. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
It's a real pleasure. It's a real pleasure. Kelli, I'm going to get straight into it. You're the director of education at the Wine Center at Meadowood. Tell us, what do you do there? And what does being the director really involve?
Sure. So I run a little operation called the Wine Center, which is an educational body that services Meadowood guests, Meadowood members, and members of the Napa Valley Reserve, which is a private wine growing club next door. And it's effectively a just an educational body that offers wine classes at an array of levels, very much grounded in the wines of Napa Valley, but also touching upon some of the other elements of wine that I think might make it more universally appealing. So beyond just the wine geek set, and we try to create classes and events that touch upon wine's relationship to things like history and politics and the fine arts and science, etc. So we are both kind of an educational center, but hopefully a little bit of a wine cultural center as well.
I like the aspect of culture and history. Maybe could you tell us a little bit more about that? Are you talking about specific wineries that have a sense of history and politics together?
Well, one of the things that we offer at Meadowood are these quarterly vintner chats where we ask certain members of the, local wine community to join together in conversation. And we've had some very tenured members of the local community talk about the history of Napa Valley and on and on. We also offer classes that are much more grounded in history. So there's a class that we offer called Wine and War, which there's a very famous wine book by that name. So it's not exclusively that. We probably ought to come up with a different title for copyright reasons, but that touches upon wine regions that have been affected by war. So not only just the sort of classic continental European regions and the Great Wars, but also places like Lebanon and the Lebanese Civil War, and talking about American wine and the various wars that maybe didn't take place on the soil here in California, but certainly had a shaping effect on the wine industry. And that's everything from the Mexican-American War to the Vietnam War. Um, you know,
The
uh,
Vietnam War, that's interesting.
yeah, and
Where's
the
that
sort of
connection?
hippie movement that followed, and the back to the land movement that was a direct result of that kind of cultural shift, had a big impact on the California wine industry.
That's quite fascinating. Most people just think of wine, sipping, swirling, but I think this has more punch to it, more meat to it. So I congratulate you on that.
Well, thank
And
you. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, I when I think I was at Schramsberg, earlier on a number of years ago, and it was very interesting. When you walk in there, they have these bottles, and they say, that the very first bottle from the past late President Nixon and the late Chairman Mao, there was that Schramsberg that they
Okay.
served, and ever since there's a claim, and I'm sure it's verified, that every single time that the premiers of two of these countries have met, Schramsberg has
Oh,
been there.
really?
Yeah,
I knew about the Nixon serving it for the first time, but
yeah.
I didn't know about the continued legacy. That's very interesting.
That is very interesting. Now, I introduced this show with accolades. Now, accolades surround you, and your writings have appeared in many prestigious journals and magazines. So, how did you get into the world of wine?
How did I get into wine? Well, I got into wine. I would say first I got into writing, and then I got into wine, and then later I got into wine writing. So it wasn't, they didn't merge, I think, until later in my career. But I got into wine very much by accident. I didn't drink at all. I don't come from a wine drinking family, but I needed a nights and weekends job in college in the Boston area, and happened to walk by a wine store with a help wanted sign. And it really is as simple as it's not a particularly, it's not a glamorous tale. It was just a complete accident. But as you had mentioned, I'd sort of studied both the sciences and the arts. And as ridiculous as or as cheesy as it may sound, it was very true to me that wine, when I really sunk my teeth into it, felt like this really perfect intellectual middle ground between those two fields. But with so much more layered on top of it, language and travel and food and
Of course.
culture and history and all that stuff too. But this sort of, wine, and I get into this a little bit with the book, but with my new book, which is why we're talking, but you can approach wine from a very scientific angle,
And
but
this book,
yeah,
there we are.
there
The
you
audience,
are.
that's the book that
There she
Kelly's
is.
referring to. Okay, we'll get back to that a little later, but
Okay.
please carry on.
No, not at all. Or you could just focus on its aesthetics. And I like, just intellectually, I've always been really interested in the intersections of different fields. Um, I took a class early in my college career called something like the Science of Art. And I was I stayed very close with the professor, Professor Michael Henchman, up until his recent death. And he used things like physics to study ballet and, carbon dating to consider the origin of artworks. And that was in a really formative class for me intellectually. And it just, not just that particular intersection, but sort of all of these underplumbed intersections are really where I get excited, and wine has an endless array of them.
Oh, yes, indeed. One of my very, very close relations is with a doctor of medicine, sorry, doctor of mathematics.
Oh,
And she brings in a totally new perspective, just as you've mentioned. And wine and writing, we have that in common. We're both published authors and we're in the world of wine. It is continually changing. There's always something happening. It's never boring. It's never dull. So I concur with you. It's it's um, it's regenerating consistently, and that's what makes it so exciting. Now, talking about that, what and which writer inspires you the most to write, Kelly?
well, I guess if you're asking about wine writers,
Sure.
the wine writers that I go back to again and again for inspiration because of the way they write and the way that they approach their subjects with a certain degree of poetry would probably be, Andrew Jefford, Eric Asimov. I love Gerald Asher's writing. And then as far as, non-wine writing, just writers in general, um, I love some of the sort of old Southern canons. I love, Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor,
Sure.
of course, Hemingway. Really, really, really gotten into Alice Munro lately. So I try to read a lot of non-wine writing too, in order to not allow myself to get too just I just the longer I'm in the wine industry, the more I want to stretch rather than sort of contract, and I want to keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I feel like if you only read wine writing, you run the risk of writing about wine like everybody else, or I want to keep that expanse
Yeah, there's
against
that
that.
sort of influence which we don't really want to be influenced by their styles, and we need to expand. I totally understand, where you're coming from. Now, here's a quick question for you. With time being so much of a shortage these days, with so many things that we're doing, how do you manage to read? so many books. Do you use audiobooks
I
or you
do.
do?
Yeah.
Okay, and that helps.
I have about a 40-minute commute to work. And so I spend a lot of money each month on Audible, and I listen to a lot of books. And I'm in a little book club that I very rarely go to, unfortunately, but it's filled with these women that are much smarter than me, which I think is a really, it's always important to surround yourself with people more intelligent than you,
Ah,
and they pick some excellent books and make some excellent points. And so it's very, very invigorating. And I think important, to stay fed in that way.
well, I see it as 40 minutes of investment, and
Yeah.
clearly the results are there. So we're talking about books, Kelly. So let me congratulate you on your very recent and second book titled Wine Confidant, all right, which I'm sure the audience can see over there. Tell us, how did you tell us about the book?
Sure. So it's an introduction to wine. So it's geared for the new drinker. But also hopefully there's enough depth of information there that there's a lot to be gleaned, even if you are already pretty comfortable with the subject matter. So it covers a lot of ground despite its kind of small size. Um, it covers some of the basics, some of the mechanics of wine, right? Handling wine, opening wine, wines with wax bottles. And for that particular kind of angle, I really leaned into my experience as a sommelier. So I worked as a sommelier for a long time in New York City and then here
You
in
did.
it's very hopefully fun and easy to read and humanizing because I try to kind of inject the personal stories wherever I could to make it make sense, right? Um, so there's that bit. And then there's the bit where I probably get a lot lean a little bit more on my background as a writer, which is talking about how to taste and how to describe what you're tasting and communicate about wine with others. Because I think that that is one of the big stumbling blocks for people is talking to other people about wine, right? You may have a very rich internal experience with a bottle, but then when you
Mm.
need to communicate that outward to either express your enthusiasm or to interface with a wine professional so that you can get more like that, or that's when things get really difficult. And so I spent a lot of time talking about, how to describe what you're tasting and explain various communication strategies, right? Both for the sort of beginner and the more comfortable intermediate drinker.
So,
Uh,
so it really covers all the most important facets that a new drinker would want to learn, to chart them on their new career. It's really like the navigational tools, if I was going to use a sort of sailing analogy, would you say?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I think um, it's a collection of a lot of the questions that I've been asked over the course of my, 20 plus year career. And so I think there's some universal concerns at play here. It doesn't do it's not the wine Bible, right? It's not comprehensive. It doesn't tell you all about the subregions of Germany or Italy. It's much more about just sort of the basics
Of
of
course.
wine drinking, wine purchasing, wine collecting, wine consumption.
Day
And then,
to day.
yeah, exactly.
That's true. That's true. Well, I've gone through your book. I found it very incisive, very to the point, and most of all, a lot of great tips. A lot of
Oh,
great
thank
tips.
you.
So it's invaluable in that sense because, as you said, with great respect to other writers who go down to subregions, your average person who wants to start their wine career is not going to drill down that deep initially anyway.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. Now, talking about books, you know, authoring a book, it's a very arduous undertaking. You've got to be strong. Many flounder, but you didn't. So, what was the catalyst that empowered you to hit that very first keystroke on the keyboard for this book?
Well, it's a very useful tool called a deadline.
Ah, yes, I know. I know. I've
I
been
don't
through it.
I don't think I would get anything done without a deadline. Yeah, I think working with Academy du Vin Wine Library on this book was a treat. I had a wonderful, incredibly responsive editor named Susan Keyville, who was just really lovely to deal with, very supportive, not afraid to make suggestions. But we had a really good working relationship. We stayed in close communication, and I sent her regular sort of chunks as they were getting done for her to digest and report back on. And so we just had a really good flow. We were constantly in touch. It wasn't like I went into a cave and 6 months later came out with a full manuscript. It was very much a sort of fluid process.
I think it's very difficult these days to go into a cave for 6 months, certainly with the way that society has evolved. Now, you wrote a previous book, called Napa Valley Then and Now. So when you were setting out, your thoughts for this second book, what factors did you find most helpful to you?
Well, the experience I had writing Napa Valley Then and Now was really important because that was my first book, but it was also self-published. And it was also, for those of you that are familiar with it, really long and took a really long time, like
Sure.
5 years to write, which is a long time to do anything, right? Even a bachelor degree doesn't take that long if you're doing it right. So it was just, that was a marathon. And I learned a lot and I did a lot of things great. I'm very proud of that book, but there were definitely things that I could have improved upon. And so with this book, um, and this was what the publisher wanted anyway, but I certainly wanted it to be a lot smaller, a lot more concise,
Mhm.
and to ask for help where I needed it. So for the editor or for various friends in the industry that I wanted advice on how to shape or rethink certain areas, made it smaller, definitely leaned into my network to finish it. And I also tried to I wanted it to be what it was. On my Napa book, I think, again, I'm very proud of it, but in some ways, I think it was trying to do too many things at once, right? It's an Appalachian guide and a history, and there's producer profiles, and there's thousands of tasting notes, and there's a vintage. It's just it was too trying to do too much. So with this book, I wanted it to be really focused and clear, kind of what the point of it all was.
And it certainly does that. Certainly
Thank you.
does that. Now, Kelly, armed with the skills, grace, and elegance of the wine professional, both in New York, St. Helena, how would you describe the types of clientele that you had in both of these locations? Tell me about what differences you found, what preference of wine and style and price point.
Well, I mean, it's probably more similarities than differences. First of all, because the two restaurants that I worked in
Mhm.
were both very high-end wine destinations, and so that's a pretty limited clientele. So even though they had different frames of reference, right? Veritas was more about French wine, the specifically the Rhone, but also Burgundy. And then Press was obviously more about Napa Valley wine. That's the clientele that is going to go to a wine destination restaurant with a lot of vintage depth. That's a pretty narrow subset of wine drinkers. And in fact, I left New York and I was one of these, New Yorkers that felt like New York was the center of the world and thought California was driving off the face of the earth. I was shocked to see so many of my regulars from New York walk in the door over the years.
Hmm.
So there was a surprising amount of my Burgundy clientele, would somehow end up in my Napa restaurant, and I would be like, oh, okay, what are we gonna what are we gonna drink tonight?
Sure.
So that was interesting to see that kind of crossover, and so that felt very similar price points, generally pretty affluent clientele. Um, the difference came when I was working in retail in Boston and experiences like that. But with the two restaurants, it was pretty similar.
Now, that is quite an unexpected answer. I was thinking that there would be quite a diverse range, but thank you for giving us that insight, Kelly. And while we're talking and on the subject of tasters, in 2016, you led a wine tasting seminar at Fortune magazine for the most powerful women's summit in Laguna Niguel, California. Many consider women to be better wine tasters. Your thoughts? And you said you were very close to a late professor who brought in mathematics and different maths and science into it. And I'd like to hear your thoughts before I give you mine.
Sure. This is a tricky subject to navigate because it's very hard for me to say beyond the anecdotal. I know that there is scientific evidence out there that women potentially have greater sensitivity in terms of smell,
Mhm.
that they might even be more prone to be quote unquote super tasters, which I think is just sort of measured by the density of taste buds on your tongue.
That's right. Yeah.
Um, so I understand that there's some scientific research that sort of points to that. The problem is that wine is still so male dominated that I think it's very hard for me to really take a serious survey of the people I've encountered in my career and say whether or not that's actually true. I also married somebody in the wine industry, and I think we have a very similar level of ability when it comes to taste. I would say, we blind taste with each other often, usually to be mean, but we will
Who's
do
doing the dishes this week?
it correctly.
That's the
But
wager.
in some ways, I feel like sometimes I think I'm the better blind taster in that I can really dig into the glass in front of me and pull out a lot of clues that might give some indication of
Sure.
origin, terrain, and vintage date. But he's a better blind taster because he has a better memory than I do. And so, is that a gendered thing? I don't necessarily think so. So it's tough for me to say, which I know is a complete cop-out non-answer, but
No,
nonetheless.
not at all. Personally, I would say women do because in my experience, both during my wine career and during the formal education, there were a lot of ladies in the class, and their tasting notes were supreme.
Hmm.
And,
Well, great. I
yeah,
like
it's
that. Let's
great.
let's go with that.
Let's go with that. Okay. So on the education and tasting side, you had a short spell at Gilsom as a senior staff writer, once again winning awards. So, Kelly, what factors did you find of the utmost importance when you actually get down to writing? And I'm sure it's encapsulated in this book. Was it who you were writing to? Was it more the content combination? What exactly?
I think for me, in thinking about this question a lot lately, I think that the two things I hoped to always infuse my work with, no matter what the audience or no matter what the outlet, it are really two things, and that's factual rigor, really kind of basing things in real information, whether it's scientific or historical or, whatever.
No.
And then authenticity of voice. So, I'm a like all people, I'm a complex human being and I can speak at a lot of different levels and with a lot of different sort of tones, but I try to always can be authentic to myself. And I think that if you are authentic to your own voice, your audience will sort of find you. And
Mhm.
I think that feels a little bit more sincere than trying to imagine the ideal audience and the tone in which they might like to be spoken to and then to assume that. So I think factual rigor and authenticity are probably the two things that I hope I brought to all my
Oh,
writing.
absolutely. And the reason why I'm touching, what you did here, what you did here, what you did over there, is because all of it, it's like a web. You bring it all to the sort of rise, and that's what's in your book, because it's
Oh.
all your experiences and everything that you've encountered, in your career to date. And talking about another experience that you had, you made a brief appearance on 67 Pall Mall TV.
Yes,
And
he was 8 months pregnant, I think, in a 110-degree heat, filming outside after the fires. It was
so
sure
I've,
great.
yeah, I saw that interview, and I've visited 67 Pall Mall in Singapore, and I've interviewed their wine director there. exquisite setting, and the location is fantastic, and the view is breathtaking, in Singapore. Now, your recent book, after reading it, it's really to simplify the mystery of wine. Yet clubs like 67 Pall Mall offer a sophisticated air and exclusivity. Do you see these two wine worlds, one of simplicity and the other exclusivity, colliding? Or how do you see them coexisting?
I mean, I think coexisting is the word, right? I think that, though the aim of my book was to um, excite the new drinker, and to simplify things, of course. Like I also wanted to preserve and honor some of the mystery of wine and some of that, kind of magic and aura and of wine. And some of that exclusivity can be really tantalizing and aspirational. And, it
Oh,
certainly was at points in my career. I don't think you need to, go to 67 Pall Mall and order the most expensive bottle off the list to have a transcendental wine experience. I think you can have wonderful wine experiences at a lot of different price points in a lot of different settings. But that doesn't mean that those places aren't magical and useful and something to aspire to. It's like a destination place like that does what they do so well, that focuses on, the best. It's like going to see the Sistine Chapel in person, right? It's
no,
different,
like an
different
artist, I
than
agree. Hmm.
yeah, it's like different than looking at the slides, or if you're religious, it's like you don't need to go to church to worship, right? You can do that daily, your own life. But I think having these places, I'm not saying that the exclusivity and the sort of super high-end luxury side of wine is the best thing that we all need to aspire to, but I think it can coexist with some of the more less lofty
Yeah,
parts of the wine industry that are just equally relevant. I don't see them as sort of negating each other. I feel like they can coexist just
yeah,
fine.
a different type of
Yeah.
experience, right? So
Yeah.
the wine, at the kitchen table with a friend that you haven't seen for a long time, that's an experience. And your 67 Pall Mall, or these are all different experiences. Yep, I totally agree with you. Yeah. Kelly, you currently sit on the board of the Wine Writer Symposium. Can you tell us what that organization is about and what you do there?
Sure. So the Wine Writer Symposium was established in 2005. A woman named Tony Allegra brought the idea to Bill Harlan behind of Meadowood and to the Napa Valley Vintners, and established a yearly writers symposium. And what's really fun about being involved with it now is that I went twice in my past as an attendee and felt like it really changed, the trajectory of my career, because I was, a tradesperson that, had with the heart of a writer, and I wanted to, break into that, but I didn't. I felt like an outsider, like I couldn't really bridge that gap. And the symposium really helped me network and gain confidence and hone skills, et cetera. So, fast forward several years, and my colleague Sarah Bray and I are just getting the wine center started, and then the pandemic descended. Uh,
Oh,
and then the fires came through Napa. It was just a kind of a crazy time, and then I'm on maternity leave, and during that sort of big shuffle and chaos,
mhm.
the wine writer symposium was sort of handed to the wine center, to carry forward. So it became kind of part of the wine writers. It became part of the wine center, which is itself a part of Meadowood. So Sarah Bray took over as the executive director, and she is still acting in that role through this January's virtual symposium, and then she's moving on. I'm the president of the board and the CEO, and I'm on the programming committee.
So
So,
is the virtual symposium?
well, we have, because of the pandemic,
Right.
like so many other people and things, we figured out a way to do it online. And so we did it online for 2 years during the pandemic, and then we returned to in person for 2 years. And now the current plan is to, kind of bop back and forth between virtual and in person because though there's nothing beats, small group in a room together for
Mm.
3 days, workshopping and getting to know each other and forming friendships. With the virtual format, we can reach so many more people, and
Sure. And
that
internationally, I would
yeah,
imagine as well.
and internationally as well. So that
Mm.
was that was rewarding on a whole other level. And so we're just trying to navigate that balance right now.
Well, I think it's remarkable that there is this opportunity where aspiring wine writers can glean some of the knowledge and experience that you've got to offer them. So,
Yeah, it's
in
fun. It's a
addition,
wonderful
in
organization.
addition to all of this, there's the wine writer, there's the wine center, there's the writing. So many people, all, responsibilities you have to carry, calling upon your time, family life, professional. How do you juggle your time?
Yeah,
Yeah.
not well. Not well. Yeah, I'm in a near constant state of guilt, anxiety, and self-doubt. Um, no, I'm doing the best I can. In a sort of an apology, note to my husband recently, wrote that my focus these last couple of years is to try to be, a great mom, a really good employee, a decent friend. This is sort of what I can do because you can't excel at all of it. And my first job is to be a mom, and then my second job, is to work on all these professional endeavors that put food on the table and
Yeah.
keep the industry that I love, hopefully, moving forward and helps create opportunities for others. And then, everything else comes in where it
Comes
can,
together. Well, I'm sure millions of women all around the world, both women and men, they also feel, being torn apart. But the fact that you've identified them and, you put balance, that's a great start. So that's a great start. Well, let's talk about the future, the future of wine, Kelly. Given the backdrop of a rising trend for non-alcoholic wines, a change in generation, climate change, and shifting population patterns like India and China, where do you see the future of wine now?
I think this is probably where I benefit from having been in the wine industry for over 20 years and also being a student of history in that, with all due respect to all the pain and anxiety that a lot of my loved ones in wine are feeling right now, and that is very, very real. I tend to take a little bit of a long view on these things, and as a result, tend to be a little bit more optimistic, a little bit less doom and gloom. I think that you need to just be study American Prohibition to understand how these things go, how the changing generations affect wine tastes, wine markets, war and culture wars change, move the market greatly. I mean, these things are a way more fluid and elastic, I think, than we necessarily realize from year to year.
Mm.
And so I think that though obviously climate change is extremely concerning, um, a sort of a neo-prohibitionist movement is also concerning. Changing consumer tastes can be confusing. I think that this is just a part of the wheel that turns, right? With probably the exception of climate change. And I think, fashions turn and turn over and come back. Even and that includes fashions in health and social consumption patterns and things like that. So I'm not as nervous, but I
Mm.
also I also want to, acknowledge that a lot of my friends, especially those that are small producers in
Yeah,
California and or grape growers, are in a lot of pain right now and they're pretty freaked out. So that's real. And I don't think that, maybe sitting back in my armchair and getting out my pipe and talking about history is any kind of comfort,
sure.
but it keeps my overarching concern for the wine industry at bay.
But history does repeat itself. So to be a student of history, you do get some sort of insight into what possibility the future may bring about.
Yeah, there have been grape
Yeah,
gluts and plummeting prices before,
of course.
right? There have been movements toward different patterns of consumption before. There's market corrections in all industries at
And
all.
everything. And everything.
So I'm not as worried. The one thing that is the big sort of like ugh, is climate change. It's like, okay, well, what's 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 going to happen with that?
Well, let's see what happens. Let's see
Yeah,
what
we have no
happens.
choice.
Yep. So I'm going to come back to this great book again that you've written here, Wine Confident, all right? In this book, you covered many things, but you didn't cover a section on really pairing food with wine. Was there a reason for this?
But that's in there. It's not the most detailed, but pairing food and wine is in there. I think the kind of the subheadings I had, if I remember correctly, are selecting glassware.
Yeah,
You're definitely overthinking it. Wine and food pairing, you're probably overthinking it. And wine temperature, you're not thinking about
wasn't
it.
extensive, shall we say? Yes.
No, no, it wasn't extensive. I think that probably I was aware that as with my background as a sommelier, there would be probably a lot of interest and attention to my thoughts on wine and food pairing.
Mhm.
But my thoughts on wine and food pairing are probably a little bit disappointing
No, I don't think so. I
and
think you're
and
being very
and
modest.
and full of anarchy for most. I think that the reason why I've kind of moved away from
Mhm.
being so obsessive about wine and food pairing is I think there's just a disproportionate amount of consumer anxiety about it. People are really, I mean, especially interestingly, I think when I was working in restaurants, it was less so because people were in my hands, they were in the restaurant, they were sort of submitting to the experience. But when I was working in retail, I mean, people would come in with their whole recipe of like, this is what I'm making, what wine can I do, but shouldn't I
Sure.
be thinking about this? And or picking a wine and being like, okay, now what can I cook? What can't I cook? And it was just you'd see this sort of pressure that they were putting on themselves.
Yep.
And my whole point was like, it is definitely worth putting some careful consideration into wine and food pairing. And like, if you want to know the basics, here are the things that I think are important to think about. But I also hopefully really drilled across the point of this is a pretty low risk proposition, right? Like a great food and wine pairing is a great thing. A bad food and wine pairing is not that bad.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
is gonna, nobody is gonna like,
It'll be
walk
a talking
back.
point.
Yeah, exactly. Like slap you across the face. Like there's very limited downside.
Yeah.
And especially if it's like a good wine and a good meal.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I had a meal recently with some friends of mine, and we chose an Amarone, and we had salmon with it.
Yeah.
Quite quite different, but it worked really well.
And
Worked
that's the thing is I think
stupendously well.
that's wonderful. And I think this idea of being like creative and playful, and sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. I
Yeah.
knew I knew an Austrian guy that swore by like Riesling with steak. And that's
Riesling and steak. Okay, I'll try
like
it.
his thesis was that the high acid in the Riesling worked with the fat in the steak. And I tried it and I was like, okay. I mean, it wasn't the greatest thing, but I think I'm so
I'm
culturally
gonna try it for you, Kelly.
yeah. Circle back and let me know how it goes. I mean, I think I'm just so culturally um programmed to want big red with red meat. But again, like but cultural programming is a part of the
Sure.
wine and food pairings. Like a little bit of it is
Well, I
beyond
think
just the pairing and it's very cultural as well. And that's
you're
why we
right.
have
I
to be
mean, what I find extraordinary is you have significantly large international wine companies marketing their reds in India. Say, this goes with a great piece of steak.
yeah.
I find that extraordinarily, you know, uh,
That's amazing. Yeah.
how wrong they are, and yet
I'm not
they don't consider that because Indians generally don't eat big slabs of beef.
Yeah,
Here we
yeah,
are.
that's not so sensitive, right? But I'm sure there's all sorts of
There's
other
all
wonderful
sorts.
regional cuisine that would go great with that. You just need to kind of throw away the playbook a little bit, you know?
We're talking about food.
Mm,
My last question to you, Kelly. If you could have four guests for dinner, what three-course meal would you have, and what wine would you pair it with? One limitation. No American wine can be served during this meal, only Italian.
okay. So you want to know the
Three-
four people I would invite and then what we would drink
Sure. And what would you eat?
and what would we eat?
You
Okay.
don't have to name the four guests. More
Oh,
the
I thought that's what you wanted. So
no,
I
no, no. More. What is your three-course meal that you would
Oh
prepare
no.
with
No,
wine?
I have to tell you my guests because
Okay. Well, okay.
I
How about we do this? You tell us the
okay.
guests and the wine you would have. Okay.
Because I thought a lot about this because this is always such a fun intellectual exercise. I thought, okay, I'm having four people over for dinner. Who am I having over for dinner? And
Can be anyone.
I wanted to invite Michelle Obama,
Okay.
Eleanor of Aquitaine, because why not?
Eleanor Aquitaine. Yeah. Born
Yeah,
her.
Eleanor of
Yeah. Okay.
Aquitaine, Kim Gordon, who's like a rock and roll hero of mine, and Buckminster Fuller, who's one of my favorite crazy scientists. And I would have them over. And if I was doing three courses of just Italian wine,
Sure.
so I'm not an Italian wine expert by any stretch of the imagination,
Okay.
but
Well, how about let's open the doors for you. Okay.
well,
Which
no.
three wines would you like then?
I accept your challenge. So I
Okay.
would say some of my favorite Italian wines are what I guess if I had to pick three, I would start the meal with Tiberio's Fonte Canale, which is an old vine Trebbiano, Trebbiano d'Abruzzo.
Viviana, yeah.
Beautiful
Good
wine.
choice.
And then I was thinking, obviously with if Michelle Obama is at this dinner, we have to have a lot of vegetables. So that would be sort of, like a
Vegetables. Okay.
big crudité. She wants everybody eating healthy. Lots of big vegetable course, many salads, sort of a hodgepodge. I personally really love Barbera. So I love Elvio Conio's Pre-Phylloxera Barbera, which
Euphyloxera, yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's really tasty. I love the sort of bright snappy red fruits of that Barbera. And then one of the best older Italian wines I've had in my life was a 1970 Gaia Sori Tilden from Barbaresco. So
Ah,
I would do that, and I would do that just with some, beautiful, simple white truffles over pasta and butter, like nothing particularly crazy. Um,
well, it doesn't need that because the complexity of the wine itself will,
right.
envelop the simplicity of the food. Wow. I'm sad I wasn't one of the guests.
I think there's still room. I can make a bottle go around 10 people. So we can invite a couple more. Maybe get Cleopatra in here.
Well, Kelly, and I'd like to share here with the audience. You have seen and heard this remarkable and extraordinary author who has many different facets of life. She's put them together, she's blended them, and she's put just a part of it. And I'm sure there'll be many more books coming out, but she's just written a part of those experiences in this book right here. So if you have a chance, and where can they get this book, Kelly?
So lots of little small bookshops and wine stores around, have been carrying them. So I would always start there, start with your small local options. And if they don't have it, you can order it from the publisher directly, which is Academy du Vin Wine Library. Meadowood, of course, sells it. And there's always Amazon. So lots of different options.
Okay, so audience, you've heard it from the author herself. And I hope to see you at the wine center sometime, Kelly,
Come and visit. Come and visit.
when I'm next there. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very much. Congratulations on your book and wish to see many more coming out as well.
Thank you,
So
Dr. Lee.
have a great time and all the best for the coming year. It's been a
You,
pleasure. Thank you
you
for
too.
joining us. Thank you very much for watching our video. And if you liked our video, please like, share, comment, subscribe to our channel.